comedy for the new year on BBC1.
I hope you'll be very happy with us.
Thank you, my lord.
Now, your first job will be to engage a new parlourmaid.
A new parlourmaid? Shouldn't be much of a problem, my lord.
Would you care for some Brussels sprouts?
You've got a ping-pong ball in your soup, Squiffy.
With most dinner parties, they serve croutons.
Hello, Brushstrokes is back. We're filming a new series.
So we'll see you in the new year, eh?
So be there.
I don't watch it myself.
You're in it, you pudding.
Can you imagine what it is like being stuck in a changing room with 24 sweaty 16-year-old girls? Alec.
Quiet, I'm imagining.
It was the same as poor old Arthur. Do you remember? A lifetime of loyal service, and then suddenly, that was it. They said he was past it. And he was only 56.
He was an elephant.
A new season of comedy starting soon on BBC1.
And now we begin a major season of films starring Meryl Streep as she takes on the role of a disenchanted farmer's wife who encounters the British adventurer of Robert Redford in the stunning setting of the Kenyan countryside. Out of Africa.
I met a woman on a train. Is this a seat taken?
Yes. Oh, I mean, yes. Yes, it is taken. I have a husband. I have a life, and I have things that I have to be there. Frank? Frank?
Meryl Streep and Robert De Niro. Falling in Love. Friday at 9:30 on BBC1.
And they're falling in love on BBC2 shortly in Hannah and Her Sisters, Woody Allen's witty portrait of three neurotic New York sisters who find they've too much on their plate when their relationships become as entwined as a bowl of spaghetti, something akin to the four men and women featured here on BBC1 in 10 minutes, all of whom know the look of love, confiding their troubles to a barman in a music and dance spectacular based on the songs of Burt Bacharach and Hal David. And that's after the news now on BBC1 with Chris Lowe.
The new Romanian leadership has abolished the death penalty and cuts the working week. President Iliescu gave the news in his New Year message, and he promised free elections next April. And in Hong Kong, thousands call for an end to communist rule in China. Good evening. The new leadership in Romania has abolished the death penalty and formally disbanded Ceausescu's hated security police, the Securitate. In his New Year address, President Iliescu also promised economic reform and reaffirmed his commitment to multi-party democracy. Elections are planned for April. A minister in the new government told reporters that in Romania, communism is dead.
New Year's night saw no street celebrations. Fear of sniper fire kept people indoors. But behind shuttered windows, they toasted a new era. These are Bucharest's hidden middle classes, now able to bring in a new year with warmth and light and foreign visitors, something they were starved of in the past. Only now are they beginning to relax, but they're still bemused at the speed of change.
Even now I can't believe it. It happened.
I'm so happy about what it is that I don't know if I wish anything more than that. Whatever I wished, it already happened.
In a televised New Year message, President Iliescu was promising measures to help ordinary people. For peasants, an acre of land apiece to till as their own. For townspeople, a cut in the working week from 6 to 5 days. He also announced the abolition of the death penalty and the formal disbanding of the feared Securitate. The new economic measures will be immensely popular. They are steps away from the present Stalinist system. and scrapping the death penalty is intended as an explicit signal that the execution of the Ceausescus is not a license for a wave of revenge killings. Taken together, they are tokens of intent from a government that says it wants to build a decent, democratic Romania. People gathered in their churches this new year to find that change is already affecting religion. The Catholic Church saw its first bishop in a decade. And the underground Catholic Church, the Uniates, suppressed 40 years ago, have been legalized. The pace of change is breathtaking, and it's affecting everybody and everything. Brian Hanrahan, BBC News, Bucharest.
Mrs. Thatcher has sent the Soviet people a New Year message, giving their leader, Mikhail Gorbachev, special credit for the historic changes which have transformed Eastern Europe. In his New Year broadcast, President Gorbachev greeted the wave of revolutionary renewal which has swept the Eastern Bloc, but he said last year had been the hardest so far in the process of perestroika or restructuring. He warned that ethnic tensions had worsened and economic reform had been dogged by a lack of order and discipline in Soviet society. More than 10,000 people have taken part in demonstrations in Hong Kong calling for an end to communist rule in China, the colony's biggest protests for months. Organisers said the turnout was boosted by the democratic changes in Eastern Europe.
This nervous colony's final countdown to the communist takeover in 1997 began in the first moments of the new decade with a pro-democracy rally. In front of Hong Kong's tame version of Parliament, there were candles to show solidarity with the successful Romanian revolution. A flame of freedom was lit using the goddess of democracy symbol destroyed by the Peking communist authorities last June. This afternoon, 10,000 marched through Hong Kong, calling for an end to what they called the Ceausescus of China. The demonstration ended outside China's de facto embassy here, the Chinese news agency. Peking regards the pro-democracy alliance as subversive and has labelled its leaders as counter-revolutionaries. In fact, they're moderate, middle-of-the-road politicians alarmed by Peking's hardline attitude to Hong Kong's democratic hopes. Today, demonstrators copied Romanians by cutting out the heart of China's communist flag. Brian Barron, BBC News, Hong Kong.
The Health Secretary, Kenneth Clarke, says he's very pessimistic about achieving an early settlement of the ambulance dispute. Later this week, Mr. Clarke will be writing to health service district managers, telling them the government is determined to stand firm against union pressure.
The Christmas and New Year celebrations were seen by some as a make-or-break point in the 4-month dispute. The use of voluntary organisations and the army helped the period pass without serious incident, but it's also passed without any sign of a settlement.
The management want to pay more to those people with paramedical skills, they want to have some local flexibility, and they've offered a very fair deal, which is at least 9% for every ambulanceman in the country, now backdated to April. Now, until there's some sign of the unions modifying their tune and turning away from public relations and going back to serious discussions, I remain pessimistic about the outcome of the dispute.
That's very silly, isn't it? We've been asking the Secretary of State to meet us in order to negotiate a settlement of this dispute for over 17 weeks now, and it's been the failure of the government to release their negotiators to negotiate with us that's kept this dispute going.
Mr. Clarke is to reiterate his position in a letter to NHS managers. The ambulance unions will discuss theirs on Thursday. They say they're planning a new initiative aimed at breaking the continuing deadlock.
An oil slick covering 100 square miles is now just over 10 miles from the Moroccan coast. The slick stretches from Tangier to Safi. It comes from an abandoned Iranian tanker which is now being towed towards the Canary Islands. It's believed 70,000 tons of oil have been spilt, twice the amount lost from the Exxon Valdez off Alaska last year. The French Environment Minister has flown to Morocco with a team of experts to try to clean up the oil. Cabinet papers released today show there wasn't enough evidence to convict Guy Burgess of spying for the Soviet Union. Public records made available under the 30-year rule show the government felt it would not be able to take any action against Burgess if he came back to Britain to visit his sick mother. In fact, Burgess never returned and died in Moscow just 4 years later.
The 30-year-old papers from the Records Office show the Macmillan government deeply embarrassed by the Burgess affair. Although he'd fled to Moscow after being exposed as a Soviet agent, the cabinet was warned privately that if he came back, there probably wasn't enough evidence to arrest him, far less convict him of spying. The remnants of imperialism were also causing trouble. 11 Mau Mau detainees at the Hola camp in Kenya died after being beaten up by guards. There were states of emergency in Nyasaland and Rhodesia. The papers reveal Britain's growing frustration with its colonial role and how this led to Macmillan's great Winds of Change speech the following year. As the election approached, the government engineered a consumer boom, and the Treasury proposed the introduction of a £2 note. The Cabinet vetoed it, fearing it would draw attention to the falling worth of the pound.
The world may have changed, Britain's role in it certainly has, and so is the value of money. But some of the issues discussed by Mr. Macmillan's Cabinet are still around to preoccupy Mrs. Thatcher's.
The Cabinet was warned that increased traffic could block city centres within 5 years. The solution? Parking meters. And the reunification of Germany was causing storms in diplomatic circles, with Britain, it's revealed, trying to broker a solution between the superpowers. The attempt failed, the wall was built, and that issue took 30 years to get back on the agenda.
Now, football, Liverpool are still top of the First Division, but their lead's been cut to 2 points. They were held to a draw at Nottingham Forest after Ian Rush had given them a 2-goal lead in the first half. David Platt was again among the Aston Villa scorers as they closed the gap on Liverpool at Chelsea's expense. Villa also have a game in hand on the leaders, while Arsenal stay third after beating Crystal Palace 4-1. Southampton won at Charlton. In Scotland, Hearts move up to third place after a 2-0 win over Hibernian. None of the other clubs played today. Supporters of Second Division Wolverhampton Wanderers are claiming an unusual record after chartering 6 planes for the away match at Newcastle. They say it's the biggest airlift ever organised for an English League game, and it was richly rewarded.
950 Wolves fans met at Birmingham Airport this morning. A massive New Year's Day party at £73 a head, the special fare from the Midlands to Newcastle. The Greenland branch of the supporters club was represented. The Guinness Book of Records will be formally contacted tomorrow.
When it started to get up to the 900 mark, we really couldn't believe it. We didn't know when it was going to peter out, to be truthful. And in fact, even at the airport, fans were trying to get on board the aircraft. Incredible.
If Santa had run out of presents by the time they'd reached the ground, Newcastle hadn't. An early penalty miss, and then in the second half, a bad defensive error made the trip worthwhile. Steve Bull, Wolves' star striker, had refound his touch. With only 1 goal to his credit in 2 months, he then scored 4 in the space of half an hour. Bull was on a roll as Newcastle collapsed. The atmosphere in the ground turned ugly moments later as Bull collected his hat-trick. One home fan had to be restrained from attacking the Newcastle bench in his anger and frustration. A consolation goal followed, only to be topped again by Bull. A hint on New Year's Day of a World Cup year that Bull means England business.
And that's all from the newsroom tonight. Good night.
A very good evening to you. Well, it's been quite a wet day in places today. You can see on the radar pictures most of the rain was on the western side through this morning, and it has pushed its way eastwards and northwards as we've gone through the day, and some pulses of quite heavy rain mixed in it as well. The satellite picture this evening shows that we are getting some clearer weather now pushing its way in from the west, but more in the way of cloud coming in from the southwestern part of Ireland too. And it looks as though once again tomorrow these rain-bearing fronts will be coming into many western areas. So that's where we got most of the rain at the moment, over central parts of the country into the east too. And that's going to push its way across in towards the North Sea and generally die out as we go through the night. And as the clearer weather comes in, so some mist and fog patches are likely to form. At the same time, showers pushing their way across Ireland, eventually getting up into western parts of Scotland. Now, it's going to be quite a cold night. Temperatures down to 0 in as far south as the western part of the Midlands and southern parts of Wales. So a lot of cloud around to start with tomorrow. The mist and fog clearing and then brightening up from time to time on the eastern side. But in the west, a good deal of cloud and this rain pulsing its way up through the Irish Sea. Quite mild and windy in the west, still a bit cold in the east. But that's it. Bye-bye.
Tuesday evening, set sail with Holiday 90. Then in EastEnders, Trevor seeks a little friendly advice.
All right, Trev, what exactly is it you want to know about women?
Well, everything really.
While in Porridge at 8 o'clock, fast-footed Fletcher is in over his head.
Oh, fire drill. All back to your own soldier,
At 8:30, teams led by Ian Botham and Bill Beaumont answer questions of sport. Then at 9:30, Africa sets the stage for a star-studded cast in The Wild Geese. Live at the Roxy at 11:40, the legendary Chuck Berry is set to rock and roll. Set your sights on BBC1 this Tuesday night.
In just over an hour here on BBC1, our late film stars Sidney Poitier in The Heat of the Night, about a solitary Negro who's arrested for the murder of a rich northern industrialist one steamy September night in Mississippi. Before which, we've a music and dance spectacular directed by Gillian Lynn and based on the songs of Burt Bacharach and Hal David, exploring the look of love.
Hi. Glad you could come. Say, have you ever noticed how people in a bar want to tell you their life story at the drop of a hat? Take these regulars of mine, for instance. Now, they're all lovely people, but they've all got problems of the heart. Look at Eve. She's really in love.
Anyone who ever loved could look at me and know that I love you.
With Alec, who's really in love with Eve, and out of love with Eve, and back in love with Eve.
Anyone who ever dreamed could look at me and know I dream of you.
But it's the age-old problem of today.
Knowing I love you so.
Afraid to commit. Not so Jeff. He's thrilled to commit to every girl on the block.
Anyone who had a heart would take me in her arms and love me too.
Well, for 5 minutes anyway. Ask Blythe. She's been one of Jeff's favorites from time to time.
You couldn't really have a heart and hurt me like you hurt me and be so untrue.
The trouble is, she can't forget him. Oh, and here's our young Alfred.
What am I to do?
He can't figure any of it out, who or how to love. He's only a beginner. What is he to do? What are they to do? Anyway, why don't you stick around? You'll see what I mean. Besides, I make a mean Virgin Mary.